It's Mike Monday here with your daily dose of information, inspiration and insight to get you moving in and out of the studio. And I'm going to answer three questions today. Blast them off quickly because I've got a load of questions to answer. How do you stay motivated when you're too creative and have too many ideas coming in? What's a good routine to learn music production? And how do you know you're skilled enough to sell your music or do commissions? And obviously these come from various people, but before I answer them, I've got a set of tools for you to download. They are about removing your obstacles, creating huge momentum in the studio, actually getting stuff finished. They're not the kind of tools you're probably used to, not things like plugins or anything like that. So to get them, go to mikemonday.com/7 top tools. And when you get the download, there's also another free surprise if you want to sign up for that. So on to the questions. Let's say, this is from Rafael Madzik on the my Facebook page. Let's say you're too creative regarding having ideas, but I have difficulty staying motivated to actually record stuff. So I think there's something important you want to understand, Rafael. You are not being creative if all you are doing is having ideas. Everyone has ideas. Ideas are in abundance. Good ideas. There's thousands of good ideas in abundance. I mean, I've had all kinds of ideas in my life, but I would not call that being creative. I call that having ideas. What is truly creative is solving the problem of how to get that idea from in here into the world. So your framing of the question, I think, is the source of your problem, in that you're thinking that you are being creative by having ideas. No, you're just being human. The creativeness comes in the execution and the delivery of that idea so that other people can understand it. So what you probably need to do is develop some habits. I hesitate to use the word discipline because it's not a very I don't think it's a very helpful word in some ways, and I would call myself a very highly undisciplined person, and the only way I can get stuff done is by creating habits which support my lazy ass into actually doing stuff and getting the ideas into my head, into the world. So what I'm going to do, I've already actually made a full video talking about this, and I'm going to put it in the comments underneath this video when I finish live streaming it. But basically putting in place some habits which mean you actually get those ideas, which isn't being creative, finished and done. So that's the first question. The second one is from one of our friends on YouTube, Resting Vard, who says, I have a question. How do I create a good routine for learning music production? Well, I think the first thing to say here is just an important distinction to make in your mind, which is that learning is not the same as being taught. Learning is not the same as being taught. You can tell it's important because I said it twice. So we have been kind of taught, or we've learned from our education system that learning equals somebody telling us what to do. That is learning. That is 100% not the case. Learning, certainly in something like making music, you do the learning in the creation of the music. Okay, so that's a really important distinction that you need to get your head around first. And the being taught part is a potential method of learning, but one which is optional, and also one which can help, but it also can hinder your actual learning. So this is what I suggest you do. At the start of the time you have available to learn music production, start, even if you know absolutely nothing, start by sitting there and figuring it out. Literally banging your head against the brick wall of not understanding what it is you are doing and just figuring it out for yourself, trying to, actually getting into a DAW and trying to work out what all of these knobs and things mean, and just feeling your way into it. I did this when I knew nothing about music production. Yes, I had a musical education, but actually the equipment I did this back in 1994 when it was samplers and synthesizers, and most of the equipment had screens the size of this watch literally, and I had to plug them all together, and it was an absolute nightmare. But that learning process, the internet wasn't really around at that time, so there wasn't like information available to teach me. I had these massive manuals that were written by Japanese people, so in English, so it was kind of broken English. I mean, I'm sure their English was much better than my Japanese, but still, it was very hard to understand. And yeah, it was a complete nightmare. But that learning process of figuring it out for myself was incredibly important. Obviously now you have the benefit of YouTube and all of the rest of it, which can actually be a hindrance because you mistake learning for watching videos, whereas the only way you're going to learn is by creating and figuring it out for yourself, really, because you have to apply that learning. So start off by trying to figure it out, and understanding that your stuff is going to sound rubbish at first. And have a notebook with you, a journal with you, while you were doing this, writing down the things that you need to, or you want to understand more about. Then when you finished your attempt at making a piece of music, that's an important point. Try and make a piece of music. Figuring it out means actually trying to make a piece of music, even though you don't know what you're doing. And then make a note of all the things you don't understand, and then at another time, in another place, preferably in another place, go to YouTube or a book or something and try and learn it. Try and kind of separate your creation and your figuring it out by creating, which is actually the learning, from the ingesting of information. Sitting there and consuming is not creating, it's the opposite of creating. And that includes consuming information about music production. And when you're asking, a good question to ask yourself is, how much of my day, or how much of the time have I spent learning about music production, and how much of my time have I spent producing music? If the majority of your time is spent learning about music production, you're not learning, you're consuming, okay? So you need to think of it as, when you create, that is you learning, everything else is optional. Trust me, it felt like an impossible mountain to climb when I learned how to produce music with machines. It was much harder back then. So you can do it. Trust me, you really can, and it is the best way to learn. In fact, in the end, is the only way to learn. Kind of treat the consumption of all of that information out there as a kind of tool that will help you learn, not as learning itself. Okay, so third question. How do you know when, and this comes from Lerome, from another of our YouTube friends. How do you know when you are skilled enough to sell your music or do commissions, and how do you go about doing it? Well, the second part of that question, how do you go about doing it, is completely dependent on the kind of music you're making. I mean, I have no information at all, and there are entire courses about this, so it's going to be impossible for me to answer that question. But in general, a couple of ways you can go about learning how to do it is see who else is already doing it, and then just investigate what they are doing, what they're doing online, just kind of investigate how the people who are doing the kind of music you're doing are actually getting their name out there, and there's an absolute wealth of information online. Do some research and development, making sure that you're creating the music first, obviously. Going back to my last question, create the music first, and then do some research online. The other thing to do is obviously networking and getting to know other people who are doing it and talking to them. I can't really answer that question without knowing what kind of music you're doing, and for this video to go on for like 5 hours. But in terms of how do you know when you are skilled enough to sell your music, the bottom line is you don't. And you probably won't ever, I mean, if you're anything like I was, you won't ever feel truly skilled. Hi, Weary. You won't ever feel truly skilled to, you won't ever feel skilled enough. I always felt like a bit of an imposter when I was producing music. I always felt that my music wasn't good enough, but that didn't stop me from doing it. At the end of the day, the way I treated my music was that as soon as I decided it was finished, whether I liked it or not, it was no longer my place to say whether it was good or bad, because what I noticed was, no matter what I did, the reaction to my music had very little resemblance to my reaction to the music. So I kind of realised that it wasn't really my place to say whether I was skilled enough. So when you're, it sounds like you're towards the start of your career, put it out there. See what the reaction is. If you don't get any reaction, it doesn't mean anything, by the way. That's something important to bear in mind. You've got to think about the sheer volume of music that's coming out all of the time, and not hearing any kind of feedback or hearing very little feedback doesn't mean anything about your music. But at the end of the day, you've got to start putting it out there, sending it to people who might tell you whether it's good enough, and seeing what happens. At the end of the day, you're probably going to get loads of no's and loads of it isn't good enough. That is just the way it is, and you've got to get used to that rejection, in inverted commas. But you've got to understand that rejection, every time you get a no, you get another opportunity to learn. One of the biggest mistakes I think people make, especially in today's market, is thinking that you have to have, that you have one chance to make a first impression. That's what I hear a lot of people saying. "No, I've just got one chance to make a first impression, so I'm not going to let anything go until it's absolutely perfect." The problem is with that is that you don't actually know when it's good enough, and you won't ever truly know. So at some point you are going to have to send it out. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to send it out to like the entire world. Find somebody who you trust and who knows what they're talking about, and ask their advice and see what they think, knowing that they might not also be right. It is just another opinion. At the end of the day, a lot of the music that I thought was terrible ended up being my biggest successes, and a lot of the music that I thought was great ended up not doing anything at all. So I'm sorry to say, at some point you're going to have to face that fear and just suck it and see. So those are 3 questions answered now. I've wanted to get through a few questions today. I'll come back probably with a more in-depth single question tomorrow. Don't forget, I've got a new set of tools to download that will help you finish more music and learn more. Remember, the only way that you learn how to make music is by actually making it. Learning is not being taught. So to help you do that, you can download the 7 top tools for massive music momentum at mikemonday.com/7 top tools. And if you've found this useful, if there's anyone who you think might need to hear this, share it, tag them, or just plain tell them about it. So until next time, onwards and upwards, and go and finish something.